Years ago, I had the chance to pastor in Pecan Gap, Texas. I was preaching off this text from Genesis about Abraham and Sarah. I was trying to help the people feel the weight of the story. So I asked, can you imagine having children in your 80s or 90s or close to 100? One of my beloved older members of the church, who probably half the time didn't hear very much, heard this because she quickly jumped up from her pew and screamed, "No!" at the thought of having a child at the ripe age of 86 years of age. And as you can imagine, the whole congregation cracked up laughing. And honestly, she may have understood this story better than anyone else in that church that day. Because that is the point. A veces las promesas de Dios parecen imposibles porque solo podemos ver lo que ya pasó. Sarah was not a young woman waiting on God's timing. She was a woman who had already lived a lifetime. She had buried her dream. She had made peace with disappointment. The promise of a child was not delayed. It was impossible. And Sarah laughed. Sarah vio el final de su historia, pero Dios todavía estaba escribiendo un nuevo capítulo. Sarah's laugh is not mockery. It's protection. A veces nuestra risa no es falta de fe. A veces nuestra risa viene de las heridas de la vida. There's a kind of laughter that comes from joy. But there's another kind of laughter. The laughter when someone suggests something you stopped believing was possible. Like, can this relationship heal? Huh. Can I really start over? Huh. Can addiction recovery really happen? Huh. Could God really use someone like me? Huh. Not because we don't want it, but because wanting something you have lost hurts. God's response to Sarah is beautiful. God does not punish her laughter. God enters the conversation. Dios no rechazó la risa de Sarah. Dios transformó su risa. Why did Sarah laugh? In other words, Sarah, let's talk about the place where you stopped hoping. Last week, when we worshiped, we talked about Abraham being invited to believe a minority report. The majority report looked at the wilderness and saw nothing. God saw a future. El mundo ve nuestras limitaciones. Dios ve posibilidades. Now the report looked at Abram and Sarah and said, "You're too old, too late, too broken, too impossible." God said, "No, this is where the story begins." And the brilliance, Isaac, means he laughs. Sarah's laughter gets transformed. The very thing that represented doubt becomes the name of the promise. Grace does not erase Sarah's laughter. Grace redeems it. The place of her deepest doubt becomes the reminder of God's faithfulness. Donde nosotros vemos un final, Dios puede ver un comienzo. Now let's jump forward to our gospel lesson tonight. Jesus sees the crowds. Jesús no mira a las personas heridas y ve problemas. Jesús ve hijos y hijas amados de Dios. What did everyone else see? Problems, need, sickness, brokenness, too much pain. Maybe the disciples saw, we don't have enough. Not enough money, not enough resources, not enough people. Sound familiar? You see, we are a small remnant church in Dalhart. We've been meeting the last year at the Hampton Inn and Suites. The majority report says you don't have enough. Jesus says the harvest is plentiful. Jesus sees abundance when others see scarcity. La gracia de Dios siempre mira más profundo que nuestras heridas. But here's the twist. Jesus says, pray for workers. Then the next verse, Jesus sends them. El milagro no es solamente lo que Dios hace por nosotros. El milagro es lo que Dios hace a través de nosotros. They become the answer to the prayer they prayed. The disciples probably thought, Jesus, we meant send qualified people. Send experts. Send people who know what they're doing. Instead, Jesus says, you go. And look who he sends. Peter, who will fail. Thomas, who will doubt. Matthew, who everyone judged. Ordinary people. People with stories. People with wounds. People who probably laughed too. Dios usa personas imperfectas para compartir un amor perfecto. Sarah laughed because she thought the story was over. Sarah se rió porque pensó que la historia había terminado. To laugh. Pero Dios lo dio a Sarah una nueva razón para reír. Because with God, the places we call impossible may become the places where grace begins. Porque con Dios, los lugares que llamamos imposibles pueden ser los lugares donde comienza la gracia. Amen.